Wait, the entire building is made out of snakes?
Yes, and all of the snake heads are deliberately woven to face inward, dangling from the ceiling and walls, endlessly spitting and hissing venom.
Man, this freezing rain today is absolutely miserable. I was stuck in traffic on the interstate for 2 hours on the way to the studio. Heater barely working. I'm telling you, Arthur, my bones are entirely frozen.
You modern Americans are so delightfully dramatic, Tom. If you think a bit of sleet and traffic is miserable, just wait until we step beyond the golden walls of Asgard. If you thought the god's citadel was steeped in blood, prepare yourself for the cosmic dread of the howling wastes.
Welcome to Nordic Lore, Episode 3. I'm Tom Williams, your resident skeptic.
And I am Dr. Arthur Pendleton. Today, we leave the illusion of safety behind. We focus on the most complex, dangerous figure in the entire Norse pantheon and the brutal, frozen landscape that forged him.
We're finally talking about the trickster, the guy who turned into a female horse to seduce a draft stallion in our last episode.
Precisely. But calling him a god is somewhat generous. Loki is not truly one of the Aesir by blood. He is the ultimate infiltrator. He is, in fact, a giant. His father is the giant Farbauti, and his mother is Laufey, sometimes called Nal. He even has 2 giant brothers, Byleist and Helblinde.
Wait a minute. So he's essentially 100% giant? The sworn ancient enemies of Asgard? How did he get a VIP pass into their golden halls?
That is the terrifying paradox of Loki. He is exceedingly handsome and fair in appearance, but deeply malicious in his mind and entirely fickle in his nature. He sits at the tables of the gods, yet he is known as the slanderer of the Aesir, the father of falsehoods, and the ultimate disgrace of all gods and men.
A handsome sociopath. Got it. But if he is such a total disgrace, why do they keep him around? Thor could just swat him with that hammer, right?
Because he possesses a supreme cunning intellect, a trait called Snoohead, and he uses his deceptive tricks in absolutely everything. He constantly drags the Aesir into the most lethal, agonizing dangers, only to save them at the very last moment with his dark, clever advice.
Wait, Arthur, stop right there. You keep mentioning this snood, this cunning. Give me a specific example. What kind of brutal situations is he actually causing?
Very well, Tom. Let us look at a prime example of his malicious nature, the theft of the goddess Sif's hair. Sif, you will remember, is the wife of Thor. One night, in an act of pure, inexplicable treachery, Loki sneaked into her chambers and sheared off every single strand of her magnificent golden hair.
He just shaved Thor's wife bald? For a prank? That is an absolute death wish.
And death nearly found him. When Thor discovered this, he seized Loki and threatened to crush every single bone in his body unless the trickster fixed what he had done. Terrified, Loki swore a desperate oath to travel down to Svartalfheim, the pitch-black subterranean realm of the dark elves and dwarves. His mission was to compel them to forge new hair for Sif out of pure gold, hair that would magically grow to the flesh just like natural hair.
Down to the underground blacksmiths.
Precisely. He visits the dwarves known as the Sons of Ivaldi, who successfully forge the golden hair, along with the magic ship Skidbladnir and Odin's spear Gungnir. But Loki, ever arrogant, could not simply take his prize and leave. He makes a reckless wager with another dwarf named Brock, betting his own head that Brock's brother, Sindri, could not forge 3 treasures equally as good.
He bet his actual head. Let me guess, the god of mischief tries to rig the game?
Naturally. While Sindri is working the forge and Brock is pumping the bellows, Loki shapeshifts into a fly. Twice the fly stings Brock to distract him, but the dwarf keeps pumping the bellows. On the 3rd attempt, while Sindri is forging the great hammer Mjolnir, Loki lands directly between Brock's eyes and stings him mercilessly on the eyelids. The blood pours down into the dwarf's eyes, completely blinding him.
Oh, that is incredibly gross. Stinging his eyelids until they bleed?
It was highly effective. Brock had to release the bellows for just a split second to wipe the blood away and swat the fly. Because of this tiny interruption, the handle of Thor's hammer came out slightly too short. Despite this flaw, the gods still judge Mjolnir to be the greatest treasure, as it is their best defense against the frost giants, meaning Loki loses his bet.
Which means the dwarf gets to chop off the god of chaos's head.
He intends to, and Thor even catches the fleeing Loki for him. But as the dwarf prepares to execute him, the trickster argues a technicality. Loki states that he wagered his head, but he certainly did not wager his neck.
Oh, come on. The classic you can have the head but don't cut the neck loophole.
Yes. Denied his decapitation by this loophole, the furious dwarf decides on a different, agonizing punishment. He takes his brother's sharp awl and pierces it straight through Loki's lips. Then, taking a thick leather thong named Vartare, he sews the trickster's mouth completely shut.
Oh, God. That audio cue was completely unnecessary. That is horrible. Just visceral body horror. His lips were actually sewn together with a leather strap.
Indeed, though Loki eventually tore the bloody holes open again. It is a stark reminder of the physical humiliations he brings upon himself. But perhaps the most bizarre insult to his dignity comes later, during a great feast, from Odin himself.
What could be worse than having your mouth stitched shut by an angry dwarf?
Psychological annihilation. In the poem Lokasenna, where Loki trades vicious insults with the gods, Odin decides to mock Loki's past in front of the entire pantheon. The All-Father reveals that Loki spent 8 full winters deep underground, living as a woman.
Wait, what? 8 years living as a woman?
Yes, Odin states explicitly, 8 winters were you under the earth, milking cows and acting as a woman, and there you bore sons, and that I think the mark of a coward.
Are you serious? He was an underground dairymaid for 8 years? And he gave birth? Again?
It perfectly encapsulates the bizarre duality of his existence. He is a figure of both horror and utter humiliation.
So if he's constantly pulling these stunts and getting his lips physically sewn shut, why do the gods actually tolerate him? Thor could just swat him for good.
They tolerate him because they have no choice. There is a much darker reason they cannot simply kill him.
Okay.
It is an ancient, unbreakable blood oath. In the very dawn of time, the All-Father, Odin, and Loki mixed their blood together. They are bound by this dark pact. Odin himself swore that he would never even taste ale unless it was poured and brought out for both of them.
Whoa. So the supreme, all-knowing ruler of the cosmos is literal blood brothers with a giant psychopath. I mean, that explains a lot about how dysfunctional Asgard is.
Indeed. And to truly understand Loki's nature, we must look at the realm that calls to his giant blood. We must travel to the east and the north, away from the golden perfection of Asgard. We must cross into Jotunheim,
The land of the giants. Just the sound of it makes me want to turn the heater up.
It is a realm of desolate mountains, freezing wilderness, deep valleys, and howling wolves. It is a place so harsh and unforgiving that when the giantess Skadi returned to her father's ancient home there in the mountains of Trimheim, she rejoiced in the bitter cold and the shrieking of wolves, preferring them far over the peaceful songs of swans by the sea.
Howling wolves over swans. Sounds like a lovely vacation spot for the family.
It is a landscape of pure fear, Tom. A place where brute physical force meets terrifying dark magic and illusions.
Hold on, Arthur. You just called it a landscape of pure fear where physical force meets dark magic. But Thor is the strongest being in existence. He has a hammer that shatters mountains. What kind of magic illusions exist out there that could possibly humiliate the gods? I need an example.
I will give you the ultimate example, Tom. It was a journey that completely shattered Thor's understanding of his own supreme power. Thor and Loki traveled deep into the freezing, untamed wilds of Jotunheim. After a long day of travel through a massive ancient forest, darkness fell, and they desperately needed shelter.
Let me guess, they didn't just find a cozy, giant-sized bed and breakfast.
Far from it. In the pitch black, they stumbled upon a bizarre, colossal hall. It was completely empty, with an entrance as wide as the building itself. Deep inside, they found a smaller side chamber and decided to sleep there. But at midnight, the very earth began to heave and buckle. A violent earthquake shook the structure so fiercely that Thor gripped Mjolnir, standing guard at the doorway of their chamber, while Loki cowered in the dark.
That doesn't sound like a normal earthquake.
It was not. When dawn broke, Thor walked outside and found the source of the tremor. A giant of utterly incomprehensible scale was lying in the forest near them, fast asleep and snoring. Thor looked back at the massive hall they had slept in. It wasn't a building at all. It was the giant's leather glove, and the side chamber where they had spent the night, cowering in fear. That was the thumb.
You were telling me the Norse gods of thunder and mischief spent the night hiding inside a giant's mitten? That is incredibly humiliating.
Thor certainly felt so. Enraged by the humiliation and the sheer size of the creature, who called himself Skrimir, Thor tightened his belt of strength. While the colossal giant slept, Thor raised Mjolnir, the weapon that crushes mountains, and brought it down with cataclysmic force directly into the giant's skull, sinking it right up to the handle.
Finally, Thor does what Thor does best. Problem solved.
Not quite. Skrimir simply stirred, lazily blinked his massive eyes, and asked if an acorn or perhaps a leaf had just fallen from the branches onto his head.
An acorn? Thor hit him with a divine mountain-shattering hammer, and the guy thought it was a falling leaf? The scale of these giants is absolutely terrifying.
It is the illusion of scale, Tom, bending the very fabric of reality. But the true humiliation awaited them when they finally reached their destination, the fortress of the giant king, Utgard-Loki. The fortress was so immensely tall, they had to bend their necks entirely backward just to see the top of the gates. When they entered the great hall, Utgard-Loki looked down at Thor with a mocking grin, calling him a mere toddler, and demanded that the gods prove they possessed any skills worthy of being in his presence.
Oh, I like this guy. He is completely unimpressed by the gods. So what does he make them do?
First, Loki stepped forward. He boasted that no one in the world could eat food faster than him. Utgard-Loki called forward a man named Logi from the benches. A massive wooden trough, overflowing with freshly slaughtered meat, was placed between them. Loki ate with frantic, divine speed, devouring all the meat on his side until they met dead in the center.
Sounds like a tie to me.
It appeared so at first glance. But while Loki had eaten all the meat, his opponent, Logi, had consumed the meat, the bones, and the solid wooden trough itself, leaving absolutely nothing behind. Loki was declared the loser.
Right.
You see, Tom, Utgard-Loki later revealed the terrifying truth of that magic. Loki had not been racing a giant. Logi was the physical manifestation of wildfire. Loki was trying to out-eat a raging inferno.
Okay, that is completely rigged. You literally cannot win an eating contest against fire. What about Thor? What impossible nightmare did they set up for him?
Thor was furious and demanded a drinking contest. Utgard-Loki handed him a rather long but seemingly normal-sized drinking horn, stating that a good drinker could empty it in one gulp. Thor, being immensely thirsty, took a massive, suffocating swallow, but when he looked in the horn, the liquid had barely dropped.
The god of thunder can't even finish a single drink.
He tried 3 times, drinking until he completely lost his breath and his vision blurred, but the level of the liquid hardly moved. Utgard-Loki openly mocked him, but the illusion was cosmic in scale. Utgard-Loki later confessed that the hidden end of that horn was magically connected to the vast open ocean. Thor had drank so deeply, with such horrifying divine power, that he had actually lowered the sea level across the entire world. He created the tides.
That is mind-blowing. He failed the contest, but he accidentally permanently altered the ocean's geography. What was his next challenge?
Utgard-Loki sneered and offered him a child's game. He pointed to his pet grey cat lying on the floor of the hall and told Thor to simply lift it off the ground. Thor marched over, put his hands under the cat's belly, and pushed upward with all his godlike might.
Wow.
The cat simply arched its back higher and higher toward the ceiling. No matter how Thor strained, veins bulging in his neck, he could only manage to force the cat to lift a single paw off the floor.
Don't tell me. It wasn't a cat.
It was Jörmungandr, the colossal Midgard Serpent that encircles the entire earth and bites its own tail. Utgard-Loki had masked the apocalyptic monster as a house cat. He later admitted that all the giants were completely terrified when Thor managed to lift one of its paws, because Thor had actually hoisted the world serpent so high it nearly touched the sky, threatening to unbalance the entire cosmos.
This Utgard-Loki is a master of psychological warfare. He makes Thor perform impossible, universe-breaking feats of strength, but masks them as pathetic failures. Did Thor get one last chance to prove himself?
He did, and it was the most humiliating of all. Boiling with rage, Thor challenged anyone in the hall to a wrestling match. Utgard-Loki sighed, saying it would be beneath his warriors to wrestle such a puny man. Instead, he called in his old, frail foster mother, a withered woman named Ellie.
Let me guess. She wasn't just a sweet old lady.
Thor charged her, grappling with all his might, but the harder Thor pushed, the firmer the old woman stood. She didn't yield an inch. Then she began to apply pressure. The strongest of the gods struggled frantically, but he was slowly, inevitably forced down until he collapsed onto one knee, gasping for breath. The match was called. Thor had lost.
What cosmic force was she? A mountain? A black hole?
She was old age. Ellie translates literally to old age. Utgard-Loki revealed that no man, no giant, and no god has ever lived, or will ever live, who can defeat old age. Eventually, she brings everyone to their knees.
That is profound and absolutely terrifying. Jotunheim isn't just a place with big monsters. It is a realm where the very concepts of nature, fire, the ocean, the apocalyptic serpent, and aging itself are weaponized against the gods to show them how small they truly are.
And this is the terrifying, chaotic realm that belongs to the giants. It is the dark mirror to Asgard. And while Loki maintains his golden facade among the Aesir, where he has a wife named Sigyn and a son named Nare, his true legacy belongs exactly here in these howling wilds.
What do you mean? Does he have a secret double life out there?
You could say that, Tom. While the gods feast in Gladsheim, Loki has been secretly slipping away. He has been traveling deep into the freezing, dark fogs of Jotunheim to meet someone. A terrifying giantess hidden in the shadows.
Oh man. Who is he meeting out there in the dark?
Her name is Angerboda, and what they create together in that frozen darkness will ultimately bring about the bloody end of the world.
Wait, Angerboda? The bloody end of the world? Are we talking about a literal apocalypse born in the freezing woods?
Indeed we are. Angerboda was a giantess, a Geig, dwelling in the dark wastes of Jotunheim. Loki, despite having his wife Sigyn in Asgard, secretly slipped away to be with her. Together in that frozen darkness, Loki and Angerboda produced 3 horrifying children.
Okay, I'm bracing myself. What kind of kids do a trickster and a giantess have?
The first was Fenrir, a giant wolf. The second was Jörmungandr, the colossal Midgard Serpent, and the third was Hel, a girl who was born half blue-black like a rotting corpse and half the color of living human flesh. She was exceedingly fierce, grim, and slouched.
Hold on a second. He slept with a giantess, and she gave birth to a wolf, a giant snake, and a half-dead zombie girl? How does the genetics of that even work? That is absolutely disgusting. Are we sure Loki didn't just adopt some stray monsters?
The myths do not concern themselves with our modern understanding of biology, Tom. These children were the physical manifestation of chaos. The gods of Asgard eventually discovered that these three siblings were being raised in the dark of Jotunheim. Consulting their prophecies, the Aesir realized that this specific offspring was destined to bring them immense harm and disaster.
So they find out the local psychopath has a secret, monstrous family that is prophesied to destroy their perfect golden citadel. What do?
They were paralyzed by dread. The gods expected great evil to come from the children because of their terrible mother, but they feared them even more because of their father, the malicious Loki. Driven by this fear, the All-Father, Odin, made a drastic and panicked decision. He commanded the gods to travel into Jotunheim, seize the children, and bring them to him by force.
They just broke into her home and kidnapped them? That is brutal.
It was violent, yes, but here is the grand, dark paradox of Norse mythology. By invading Jotunheim and violently abducting these children to prevent the prophecy, the gods actually set it in motion. They brought the instruments of their own destruction directly into their sanctuary.
So now you have a furious wolf, a giant snake, and a walking corpse dragged into the shiny penthouse of the universe.
Exactly. Picture the scene, Tom. The three struggling, terrified monsters are dragged across the gleaming floors of Asgard, thrown down before Odin's high seat, waiting for the supreme judge of the cosmos to decide their agonizing fates.
So they've got the ultimate chaotic family reunion right in the middle of Asgard's penthouse. What does Odin actually do to them?
Odin looked down upon the three children of Loki, knowing the prophecies of doom that hung over them. Now, as we discussed in our previous episode, Odin made the fateful decision to keep the wolf pup, Fenrir, right there in Asgard to be raised by the Aesir. A decision that would lead to deceit, the shattering of massive iron chains, and ultimately cost the brave god Tyr his right hand.
Yeah, I remember the silken ribbon and the severed hand. We definitely don't need to relive that trauma today. But what about the other two? You don't exactly keep a giant snake and a half-dead girl around as house pets.
Indeed, you do not. Odin seized the colossal serpent, Jörmungandr, and hurled him out of the heavens, casting him violently down into the deep ocean that surrounds all lands.
Oh my God.
Left alone in the freezing, fathomless depths, the serpent grew to an incomprehensible, massive size. He grew so endlessly that he now lies in the middle of the ocean, entirely encircling the earth, forced to bite his own tail just to fit.
An earth-spanning snake biting its own tail, just wrapping the entire world in a giant venomous hug. That leaves the daughter, Hel.
Yes. For the daughter, Odin reserved a fate of profound darkness. He took Hel and cast her down into the abyssal, freezing depths of Niflheim. But Odin did not just imprison her. He gave her an agonizing dominion. He granted Hel power over 9 entire worlds, commanding her to provide lodgings and distribute board to all those who are sent to her.
Sent to her? Like the dead? I thought Odin took the dead for his own army.
Odin and Freyr take the slain, the warriors who die violently in battle. Hel was given dominion over the rest. She receives the men and women who die of sickness and old age. She rules over the mundane deaths. Her underworld kingdom has wonderfully high walls and massive gates, and her estates are incredibly vast. But Tom, her realm is a monument to suffering. It is a true architecture of misery.
Wait, hold on. Before we get into her immediate living arrangements, what is the actual commute like? If I die of old age and have to go down there, how do I actually get to Niflheim? And please tell me her house is the worst part of this underworld.
Oh, certainly not. The journey itself is a psychological terror. A soul must ride down the hellway for 9 full days and nights, journeying continuously downwards and northwards, through valleys so impossibly deep and pitch black that you cannot see a single thing.
9 days riding in absolute darkness. Sounds like a lovely road trip.
Eventually the darkness breaks, but not with sunlight. You reach the freezing river Gjöll, and spanning this black water is the Gjallar Bridge, which is completely thatched with blindingly bright, glowing gold. But it is not unguarded. Standing upon that golden bridge is a fierce maiden named Modgud, who interrogates every dead soul that attempts to cross.
So there is a glowing toll booth at the end of the dark tunnel. And once you cross, is it straight to hell's bureaucracy of misery?
For most, yes. But for the absolute worst offenders of Norse society, there is a specialized, horrific location far worse than Hell's Hall. Deep within the underworld lies a place called Nåstrand, which translates to the corpse shore.
The corpse shore. Just when I thought the Norse underworld couldn't get any more metal.
Here stands a massive, gruesome hall, far from the sun, with its heavy doors facing due north. It is not built from timber or stone. The entire structure is woven together, like a wicker house, out of the spines of living snakes.
Wait, the entire building is made out of snakes?
Yes, and all of the snake heads are deliberately woven to face inward, dangling from the ceiling and walls, endlessly spitting and hissing venom. They spew so much toxic venom, or edda, that it pools on the floor and forms thick, rushing rivers throughout the hall.
That is absolutely horrifying. Who ends up in the snake juice river?
This specific torment is reserved for perjurers, murderers, and men who seduce other men's wives. These damned souls are forced to wade in absolute agony through the thick, toxic rivers of venom.
Wading through venom rivers in a house made of living snakes. Honestly, Arthur, this makes the Christian hell look like a mild summer vacation.
And their torment does not end with the venom. As they struggle through the toxic rivers, they must endure the colossal dragon Nidhogg. This terrifying beast actively tears at the dead, sucking the blood directly from their doomed corpses.
Damn.
But for those who manage to avoid the venom of Nåstrand and simply cross the threshold of Hell's own estate, the misery takes a different, more mundane form. Her grand hall is named Eljudnir, which translates to the damp or the dismal. When she sits at her table, her dish is named hunger, and her knife is named starvation.
Hunger and starvation? That is incredibly depressing. She doesn't get a magical meat pig or a beer goat like the guys in Valhalla. She's just the administrator of mundane misery. It's so bureaucratic and grim.
It is the grim reality of decay. She is served by a male thrall named Ganglade, meaning slow walking, and a maid named Ganglad. The very threshold mortals must cross to enter her hall is called Falling Peril. When she sleeps, her bed is called Sickbed, and the bed curtains hanging around her are named Staring Agony.
Staring Agony bed curtains? Her entire palace is literally built out of the symptoms of dying slowly. And what does the Queen of the Dead look like sitting in this horrible place?
She is a terrifying, unmistakable sight. She was born half blue-black, the color of a rotting corpse, and half the color of living human flesh. She is exceedingly fierce and grim in demeanor, and she walks with a heavy, drooping slouch.
So Odin exiles the snake to the bottom of the ocean, throws the rotting zombie girl into the freezing basement of the universe to manage the sick, and keeps the giant wolf pup in his own living room. It really feels like they are just setting up the board for their own destruction.
You have grasped the dark heart of the myth, Tom. The gods were terrified of the prophecy, but by violently abducting the children and banishing them to these extremes, they ensured the prophecy would be fulfilled. They placed the very instruments of their own apocalypse in their exact destined positions. The board is now set for the end of the world.
Well, that is quite the cliffhanger. The trickster's monstrous children are positioned exactly where they need to be to tear the cosmos apart.
The board is indeed set, Tom. But before Ragnarok inevitably falls, there are other threads to pull. The gods face many more indignities before the end.
Exactly. Thank you for listening to episode 3 of Nordic Lore. And guys, remember what I said last time. Arthur claims he has an answer for literally everything in this universe, no matter how weird or dark.
Because I do, Tom. The ancient texts leave very little to the imagination.
We'll see about that. Hit us with your absolute weirdest or most confusing mythology questions in the comments down below. Let's try to stump the professor. If we get enough of them, I'm forcing him to do a dedicated Q&A episode where we just roast the pantheon.
Bring me your inquiries, mortals. Though, speaking of the comments, someone recently asked if we are ever going to discuss the time Thor had his hammer stolen.
Oh yeah, are we doing that?
Patience, Tom. We will get to the Thunder God's agonizingly humiliating cross-dressing adventure in due time.
Wait, he wears a wedding dress? Oh, I absolutely cannot wait for that one. Sleep well, mortals, and don't go wading in any snake rivers.
Until next time. Tom, you just spilled your black coffee directly onto my original 11th century runestone translations.
It was an accident. I was laughing at the staring agony bed curtains.
Really, boys? I'll leave you alone for 5 seconds. Grab some paper towels, Tom. We are rolling again in 5,